Well, I mean, it says we're live.
We are live. We're like the only two critic people not seeing Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 tonight. We're like the only two. I'm looking at my feed. I'm like, everybody's at Guardians,
I
but
got
me.
the free baseball cap, and we're here talking about the Evil Dead Rise. But you know what? There's no place I would rather be than talking about the Evil Dead Rise with you, my friend Mark, the movie man Krawcheck of the
Thank you.
spoiler room. See, I worked that intro in nice and smooth, much like whatever it is you're drinking.
Oh, it's my Malibu and Mountain Dew. I needed it. So.
Oh, I like it. Rhymes. It's got alliteration and rhyme.
It does. And it tastes pretty damn tasty, too.
So. I'm just drinking coffee because that's how I roll at 8 o'clock on a weeknight.
I had that already. I blew through the pot, so we're already there.
Wait, the pot? Come on, Mark. Step it up.
Well, no, that was the pot that was left over when I came home from work. So, I didn't make things. So, I already blew through a pot at work. So we're
okay. I'll let it slide.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. The worst days are when you drink a pot of coffee and then you go to work and drink another pot of coffee and it's all done by like noon and you're just like flying off of rooftops.
Yeah.
Speaking of rooftops, that's a terrible transition, except that there's a building in the movie we're talking about tonight.
And that's got a rooftop.
Yes. Evil Dead high rise. No. Let me ask you this, because we had talked about talking about this movie. It was kind of touch and go whether or not you'd be able to make it. I'm very glad that you did, because I would hate to be sitting here just like ranting at the sky.
Damn you!
But you had mentioned that you were going to possibly, because you are a movie pass literal card holder now, that you might try and see this movie again. Did you see it twice or just the once?
I just saw it the once. I did not get a chance to. Instead, I enjoyed a lovely dinner with my family out. We ate at a restaurant we hadn't eaten at quite a bit, and had delicious cheese curds. And I had,
was it Culver's?
No. It's a place downtown Stevens Point called Arbuckle's. Very delicious. Great place. They remodeled since we've been in there. We hadn't been in there since COVID. Before COVID. So we went in there. It was all changed. We're like, what the heck? And their menu was smaller, but it was still really good. Good cheese curds. I had the jambalaya pasta. It was really good. And yeah, it was a good meal. So,
Well, we're going to talk about something that's not nearly as appetizing. See, I'm all about the transitions tonight.
You're all about that segue. It's like, yeah.
We had talked earlier this year, and it's hard to believe that I can say that because it feels like the year just started, but we're already almost in May. But we had talked about the 2013 remake of Evil Dead.
Yes.
A film that, for whatever reason, I can't seem to find it anywhere in the discussion about Evil Dead Rise. They're talking about the new movie and making reference to the Sam Raimi, Bruce Campbell films from the 80s and 90s. But like the remake just seems to have dropped off the face of the earth. Now, not that I have a problem with that because I wasn't the biggest fan of it, but I want to start there. Like, wasn't that movie a hit?
It was kind of. It was a surprise hit with the younger audiences, those who were really, grown up with the first three for sure. Were taken a bit aback by it. I know our good friend, our good friend of the spoiler room and friend in real life, Mr. Derek Carey, hated the film because he's a huge Evil Dead fan. But it was a hit box office wise, and even amongst shouldn't say common, I say mainstream horror audiences, it was a hit with. But it's funny you mentioned that in the discussion, because it's almost every discussion I see about Evil Dead Rises, it's almost like an afterthought. It's like, well, there's the Raimi films, and there's a 2013 remake, and then and you're like sitting here going, they'll mention it in like one sentence and move on. I have very rarely seen any of the stuff that I've seen about, press or otherwise, who've gone into how this might be connected with that one. There was the 2013 one, and then there was that interview I ran across with the director who said, yeah, the 2013 remake happened, and I'm like sitting here going, and then reading his take on things, on how there was the TV series. But if we based it kind of off of stuff that came out of there, that would be boring. and his take was interesting, but it explains, reading that explains why the movie is the way it is.
Yeah, and we'll get to that. I have it pulled up because I think you had posted that in the Earth's Mightiest Critics
Yeah.
chat, and I read it. And I was like, that explains a lot. So I gotta say, honestly, and I think I may have talked about this in one of the billion podcasts that I have put out or appeared on with you. That when the trailer for this first hit, I don't know, sometime feels like last year, maybe early this year, I don't remember. I was like, it just looks like an Evil Dead retread, except now it's an apartment building and it looks
Mhm.
mean spirited, and there's going to be no ash and no humor. But after seeing it in front of like every PG-13 or R-rated movie I saw this year, I kind of softened to them, like, maybe they'll be okay. Because not that the trailers changed, really. It's just that, the slow indoctrination, the brainwashing, you will come to see this movie. It will swallow your soul. So I went into it with a cautious but open mind,
Mhm.
and I was not rewarded for that. Let's set this up. What happens, Mark, if you would be so kind? I'm going to turn the tables on
Oh,
you.
look at this. Look at this.
Would you please give the
Wow.
synopsis for
Oh,
Evil Dead Rise?
wow. It all comes around, basically. All right. Hold on. I need I forgot character names, most of them. I apologize. So, all right. So, Evil Dead Rise. Uh, we've got a bookend scene here that comes around, but we open with a cabin. You're like, wait a minute, this is Evil Dead Rise, and we open with a cabin, and we have basically deadite shenanigans happening at a cabin. Okay, I mean, that's basically to set it up with a very cool title sequence. Don't get me wrong, we get this wonderful thing where we've got a deadite woman, and she runs out in the pier. She dives into the water with a guy, drowns him, and then she comes up out of the water in a really cool title sequence, Evil Dead Rise. And then we cut to a new person, Beth, I think it is, right?
Yeah, she's
Yeah,
the
yeah,
guitar tech. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah, and she's taking a pregnancy test, and she's been, she's discovers she's pregnant, and then we cut to the high rise finally, and this is like 10 minutes into the film. We're finally at the high rise, and there's a family there. There's a brother who thinks he's a DJ. There's the mom, and Beth shows up. We find out she's the aunt to the kids, and she's the sister to the mom of the family. There's family dramatics, and while the kids are out to get pizza, because Auntie is here, there's a earthquake, and it reveals an old vault that was underneath this building that is being condemned because the family is getting evicted. Don't worry, this part really doesn't play too much into anything. But so they go down to a vault, and the DJ kid discovers a book and some vinyl. Hey, I was kind of happy. I'm like, hey, vinyl. So he gets this book that's locked by teeth, but that's not an indicator of anything. So he takes it back up to his room, doesn't tell anyone he finds it. He plays the record. He ends up cutting his finger on the book, and blood gets in the book. We know how this is going to go. Book opens. He plays the record, and we get we get Evil Dead camera light, in which it's like this one is smoked reefer before it decided to head out and possess someone because it moves a little slower, possesses mom, and yeah, you see it go from there. Things go just sideways. Kids get possessed, more deadite action, lots of blood, lots of gore. The residents on the floor with them also get possessed, and we see how Beth tries to be protective of the young girl, Cassie, the youngest of the family, and get her out alive, while also trying to figure out how to stop the deadite horrors from happening.
And then there's a chainsaw. Yeah.
And then there's a chainsaw and a grinder.
That'd be cool if there are people using grinder in this movie. That would make it really kind of different. But
this is one of those movies where I'm watching it and they do something kind of cool, and then they don't, and then they do something kind of cool, and then they don't, and then it's this really up and down type of thing to where I'm like, I really should be digging this movie, and that's why I'm watching it. I'm like, I should be loving this movie a lot more than I am, and I came out, spoiler, I came out middle of the road for me while, with this. And I think the big question for me, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I'll just say
No.
the big question for me while watching this is, why is this an Evil Dead film? Because there's easily enough just a few tweaks they could make to where this could be a horror film on its own and didn't even need to be an Evil Dead film.
I'll tell you why. Just because I don't want to. You gave a really, bravo on the synopsis, but I just want to make sure that before we go any further, we pop
Yes.
up the old spoiler
Mhm.
warning. Because we're gonna get into it. It's an Evil Dead film because I think, yeah, with a few tweaks, you take out the references and the callbacks and all that stuff. This would be a generic horror movie that everyone's going to say, "Oh, it's just a remake. It's like an unofficial remake of the Evil Dead. It's a knockoff."
Yeah.
Right? And unfortunately, that's the same feeling I had watching this movie. It just felt like it's just the Evil Dead, but in a new setting. Now, you might people might call me hypocritical for, desperately wanting another Friday the 13th sequel. But Ian, it's just guys in a hockey mask chopping up camp counselors. It's the same thing every movie. I'm like, yeah, but at least that's what I know. I know that I'm in for that, right? The kill that you go for the creative kills and new weapons and an updated setting. That's or an updated time period. Like the
Mhm.
remake from 2009 wasn't very good, but it was at least interesting because it was the first one we'd had like really since the 80s. I mean, I'm taking out
Right.
the Jason Goes
Mhm.
to Hell nonsense. But with the Evil Dead, I think there's an expectation, and I'm going way around the bend here to get to my point. So forgive me, I'm a little
No
loopy.
worries.
That's hence
Yeah,
the coffee.
that's the
Um, I had a brief exchange with I'm not telling stories out of school, but Lee Shoquist, friend and friend of the show of Chicago Film. He messaged me, I think when he saw that we were going to be talking about this tonight. He's like, "So what did you think?" And I said I didn't like it, and he said that he really loved it. He said it was the
Mhm.
best Evil Dead since the original, and we kind of had an exchange. And he comes down to because I mentioned, you know, I'm a huge fan of the second movie. That's probably my favorite
Mhm.
out of the series because it's a perfect combination of horror and comedy. And he's never really responded to the horror comedy bit. So I can understand from that perspective, this is almost like a perfect bookend, like Rocky and Rocky Balboa. Like you have
Mhm.
Evil Dead from 1979, I think,
Mhm.
and then you've got the 2023 version, and they're kind of fun, yeah, bookends. If you forget everything in the middle, of like Ash and the comedy
Mhm.
and the Evil Dead TV series and traveling back in time and all that business. But I can't forget that because the Evil Dead brand was not really built on that first movie. It
Mhm.
was only truly established in Evil Dead 2 as a cult movie and then really in Army of Darkness in 1993. Many people will say, yeah, Evil Dead 2 is by far the better and the more classic movie, but Army of Darkness really helped propel Bruce Campbell into that mass market pop
Well, yeah.
canon, right?
Yeah, no, Army of Darkness, I remember seeing it in the theater, and I was blown away that how completely different, but I was highly entertained, and that was the thing is it went from this obscure horror film to, like you said, cult film with Evil Dead 2 because you had the camp comedy and horror all beautifully blended together. And then you just went total kind of comedy zaniness with Army of Darkness. It hit at the right time. And that's the Ash people know. That's the Evil Dead people know is the over the top, campy, comedy, quippy Evil Dead, and that's what made people fall in love with it. And now the series, when it came out, the TV series scaled it back a little. It was still Bruce Campbell and Ash, but it was kind of a interesting in between Army of Darkness and Evil Dead 2 as far as the tone and the story and everything with the TV show, which is why I think it was a hit with a lot of fans. But yeah, Army of Darkness is what brought it just into the mainstream. It was what put Ash up there with all the other iconic horror characters we got over the years.
Yeah, I mean, McFarlane Toys isn't putting out an Ash from the first Evil Dead action figure.
No,
You know, they're
no.
putting out the guy who lopped off his, welded a chainsaw to his hand and the sawed
Yeah.
off shotgun, and traveled through time. But the the other thing I said to Lee is that Evil Dead has the franchise, the series has a worse identity crisis than modern day Star Wars, because seriously, you start off with the Evil Dead, you go to Evil Dead 2, then Army of Darkness, then it kind of chills out for a while. There's action figures. There's, a lot of fun comics that are out there. One series which was written by former, guest of the show, Elliot Serrano, which I've recently read that collection from Dynamite Comics, and it kind of continues that tradition of Army of Darkness, where it's more like kind of serious action oriented, but it's also got some horror and some comedy in it. But then you come back to 2013, where it's like, we're going to do a remake of Evil Dead. And it's just straight up horror. There's kind of a modernization of like a drug metaphor. That's why everyone's kind of gathering at the cabin, so the main girl can get off smack, I think it was.
Yeah, the
But then,
2013 one. Yeah.
right. But of course, they find the book that's wrapped up in garbage bags and barbed wire, and they open it and they read it, and then all hell breaks loose. And it's a remake of the first one, and it's also sort of the template for the movie we're talking about tonight, which I promise, folks, we will get to. But it's it's humorless, it's predictable. I mean, they kind of gender swap the leads, which is fine. I really like the actress in that movie, and the performances were good. And when we talked about it on your show, I liked it better than I liked it the first time I saw it, but that's only going from I viscerally hate this movie like Derek Carey to I finally saw it again, and now I never have to think about it again, except when the sequel comes out, or the remake of the sequel, whatever. Now, in between that, we have Ash versus Evil Dead, 2 seasons of a TV show that, as you mentioned, kind of brings everything full circle. It's like, I only watched a few episodes of the first season. I got to go back and watch both of them. I really enjoyed it, but I didn't.
There's actually 3 seasons.
Was it 3 seasons?
There's 3 seasons.
Wow, I have a lot to catch up on.
You've got a lot to catch up on, and they really get into some of the mythos. They play with a lot of things. Lucy Lawless ends up showing up, playing a bit of more of a part, and I loved the show. I thought it was a really good balance, and it was an interesting way to expand the world and the scope of the Evil Dead. It really was, while not going as far as they did in Army of Darkness as far as the comedy and camp, but it didn't take itself as serious as the first film. That's why I say it's a nice blend of like 2 and 3 is the show. And as it went on, it found its legs quite a bit. It got better as it went along, for sure.
And that's nice to hear, because I thought it started off, really strong, and I enjoyed it. I've got the first season, I think, on Blu-ray. I just have to go back and watch it, and then get the other 2 seasons.
Sure.
But then they bring us to Evil Dead Rise, which is not a sequel to the remake, and it has nothing to do with Ash versus Evil Dead, except if you listen to what the director of the new film, Lee Cronin, said, and I'll bring up his I'm trying to think. All right, he says, for me, it's actually quite simple. I went to Sam Raimi and said, there's 3 books as shown in Army of Darkness. These are the books of the dead. You've used one book, Evil Dead 2013, director Fede Okay, you've used one book, talking to Sam Raimi. Fede Alvarez used one book in his 2013 film. I'm going to take the 3rd book and open up that other avenue. So we really are meant to believe that all of these movies are connected, and I don't buy it at all. It just seems like an excuse to say, here's why we didn't bring back Bruce Campbell and why the tone is different again.
See, and the thing is, I liked the concept or the idea that there was more than one book. And the only reason I like that is because, okay, I'll give that to you. That's an interesting way, and it opens up a lot of possibilities to where you don't have to do a callback to the original series. It can be its own thing. It just happens to be one of the 3 books. I don't agree that the 2013 book was a different book than the one in the remake. I mean, in the original trilogy, I would debate that, because I always got the feeling it was intended to be the same book, not a different book. Like there's another book out there we haven't seen yet. But I like that because, okay, it gives an option, and at least it gives you a little bit of a cushion. And for me, it was like, okay, gives you possibilities for the future films, and it kind of explains why this one is different. One of the problems I end up having with Evil Dead Rise, though, is, okay, you're spinning this is a different book, this is a different thing. Quit doing callbacks to the original trilogy then. If you're gonna do original, which I was all for, and don't get me wrong, I love Ellie. I love the Ellie character. I love when she gets all deadite. She was phenomenally scary, and she so got into this role. Alyssa Sutherland just gets so into this role. She was my favorite part of this whole movie, was just how much this actress lost herself in this role. But then you would do a scene, or especially a line near the very end, where you're doing a callback to the original trilogy, and I'm like, you've set it up so you could do something original. There's 3 books. This is one of the books. You've established that. You implied that. While you don't directly come out and say this is different than the other, if you're paying attention, you're like, okay, different book, different deadites, different behavior. Got it. Quit reminding me of the other books that do something original.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem with, in general, with these kind of reimaginings, remakes, or whatever. They have to remind people of the original thing, so they can't ever really have their own voice. But what draws people is the original voice of the source material.
Right.
So it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't thing. But yeah, I don't buy the multiple books thing. I never even thought about that, because if I remember in Army of Darkness, he sees the 3 books, and that's when he's trying to decide which one is the right one to open or something. And like one,
well, they're decoys.
They're decoy, and that's why when I read that statement, I had to think a second. 3 book? No, that was just a bit. That was a gag in the movie. It was almost like an illusion. It's not meant to be taken literally. I mean, filmmakers can do whatever they want, but when you're trying to say the Necronomicon ex mortis, as introduced in the voiceover, and I remember from Evil Dead 2, they tell the story of the book is bound in human flesh, inked in blood, and it's got all these spells and stuff. To me, that signals there's one book that was sort of lost to history. Now, if you wanted to say there were these like acolytes of the Evil Dead who transcribed it and made different editions or something, that's one thing. But when you're trying to say there's one book and it's this cursed object, and it's hunted for or lost and found, now you've got 3, so it's not special, and it's also just this kind of MacGuffin that you can plant everywhere. It's kind of like what they do in superhero movies now, where it's not Thor is now a mantle. We can have Jane Foster can be the mighty Thor. It's like, no, it's Thor. It's a guy. It's the one guy.
And I get that, but for me, I guess it's one of those to where I thought it was at least a good way to give the plausibility of the purpose of having the different book, is saying there's 3 books. I'm like, okay, fine. That opens up a lot of possibilities, but I get it. Yeah. It for me, it did take away from anything from the Necronomicon Ex Mortis that we see in the original. I would say if you've got 3 books, that's going to be the more powerful one anyway. What got me with this book, though, is it's supposed to be words, and it looks like nothing but an evil picture book. I'm like, I mean, you get the words on the record that the guys were reading from, but in the book, we never see any paint. We just see these very elaborate, bloody pictures of different deadites, supposedly, or beings. They don't even call them deadites. They're just different beings.
Right. And they did this a little bit in Evil Dead 2, where some of the illustrations, when you're kind of flipping past the book, you'd see like a weird image, and then that image would show up later in the movie, like the eyeball that flies into Bobby Joe's mouth. There's that obscure shot like of a man standing atop of like a mountain, and there's like people around him. He's holding something that turns out to be Ash at the very end of the movie when he time travels. But it's like things that when you're looking at it, it doesn't quite make sense. But in this movie, almost every page that we see from the book is just telegraphing something that we're about to see. We
Mhm.
see the mom when she gets possessed. That's one of the first images we see. We see the amalgam creature that kind of shows up in the parking garage at the end. But these seem to happen pretty much like right before we see them on screen. So it's not even like, oh, I wonder what that means. By that time, it's like, oh, this is a storyboard for the next scene.
It did ended up kind of being that way, and yeah, I mean, and again, it was leading me to question the purpose of it. And then people might say, oh, well, what about the other ones? And yeah, I'm like, the thing is with the other ones, and maybe it's down to this to our characters, and not the stuff with the Necronomicon and the possession and all that, with this actual family and these characters. uh we got at least a little time in the first one to spend with the characters. We got that they're friends. We spend a little time with them. There's relationship. There's a little bit of quiet time where we actually get to see some interaction. There's no real character beats in this film at all. I mean, very few, to the point. And if there are, it's not till like after all the weird shit starts happening. It's like, I didn't really care about this family at all, and it felt awkward. I'm like, I just didn't connect with any. I'm like, this is a mess of a family to begin with, and
It's
nobody's paying attention to anything.
it's a mess of a family, but I think part of and it's an almost an impossible problem because you can't have a movie without marketing. And the thing
Right.
is, if you've seen the trailer for this movie, you automatically it shouldn't be the case because they should play with your expectations.
Mhm,
I know trailers give everything away now, but going in who's going to live, who's going to die.
mhm.
The mom gets possessed and the aunt is there with her niece, and you see I think the one of the newer trailers you actually see the one girl, uh Bridget, eating the glass. So you're like,
Yeah.
okay, that's
Okay,
another one we
she
can
does,
tick
yeah.
off the list, right?
Mhm,
And so you're just watching it and everything again is just kind of perfunctory. It's going back to the pages of the book. I'm just sitting there waiting for these people to die. And again, it's not like a Friday the 13th thing where I'm going there explicitly to see, body count rack up creatively. This is an Evil Dead movie. I've got an
mhm.
expectation of, if you've never seen Evil Dead 2 before, even if you've never seen Evil Dead 1, you can sit down and watch Evil Dead 2. And the first 5 minutes, you're like, oh, okay, this is a standard going into the woods horror movie. There is no way you can predict where that movie is going to end up.
Mhm.
And the same thing with Army of Darkness. Like, you go into that movie and be like, okay, this is the sequel to Evil Dead 2. Last we saw Ash, he was back in medieval times. There is absolutely no way to predict where that movie's going to go,
Right.
right? The remake, this movie, all it is just retreading the same ground that Raimi and company had trod
Mhm.
back in 1979, with these odd callbacks and trying to be cheeky about it. Like, the problem with the for me, the problem started immediately when the movie first
Mhm.
opened. When we get the Evil Dead tracking shot
Mhm.
that Raimi and his buddies back in the late 70s, they were these poor, Michigan kids. Well, not poor, but they weren't like
Yeah.
money-backed
No.
filmmakers, so they had to get inventive. In order to do that Evil Dead tracking shot through the woods, they nailed a camera to a 2x4 and had two guys on either side literally running through the woods to make it look like these unstoppable forces
Right.
chasing people, right? In this, it opens up and the movement, you've got the music, but the movement is so smooth. I'm like, oh God, it just looks like they filmed it with a drone. And guess what? It ends up being a gag where the footage it's the perspective of a drone that this jackass is flying on the pier in the woods. Doesn't work. I mean, it doesn't work. It's kind of like when, a bad comedian will tell a terrible joke and say, hey, wasn't that joke crappy? I'm like, yeah, you're wasting my time.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, that was a little disappointing. I'm like, why not open with the actual Evil Dead tracking shot and it, possessing someone in the A-frame? Then you could go, who's this in the A-frame? What's going on? And could even track back to where you ended, to where you know, the evil that we always see, you know, the unseen evil that we're seeing the POV of, tracked the person down, which, spoiler folks, we got the spoiler banner. The girl who's possessed at the end is a girl that's in the building, but not on the floor and not involved in anything whatsoever until she gets down to the parking lot. This character who we barely know, she gets down to the parking lot. It could have had the evil following her. I would have liked that, to where she, you know, she's traveling out to the cabin, and you could put together, okay, the evil followed her and then possessed her. I'm like, okay, maybe we go that route.
You know, I don't know if this is social commentary, sloppy writing, or what, but first of all, I picked up exactly who she was from
Sure.
the moment the
Mhm.
movie started, because again, we see this chick in the trailer.
Right.
We don't
Yeah.
see the exact sequence, but we see the cabin shots and the
Mhm.
lake and everything. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that, because especially when they cut to the apartment in LA or
Mhm.
whatever, it says, you know, 1 day earlier,
Right.
which, I'm sorry, when we meet Beth, she is in Japan backstage at a concert, and she's in Los Angeles walking into her sister's place, not looking particularly tired. You know, less than 24 hours later, I'm going to pick up the phone and call bullshit. So the problem is with this lady who ends up possessed at the cabin. As you mentioned, she is one of the residents of this apartment building, a condemned apartment building that, you know, the Evil Dead kind of takes over the one floor at least and possesses a bunch of people, murders a bunch of people in the hallway. You've got multiple blasts of shotguns in the hallway, and yet the gag at the end of the film, after everything's been cleared and saved the day and Beth leaves with her niece. Sorry if that's a spoiler. Um, we get this girl walking out of her apartment, going to the parking garage, like on her phone, like, oh my God, like I can't wait to get to the cabin and all this other stuff, completely oblivious to anything that had happened. Like,
Well, and then she
am I
saw the
supposed to believe she was like on TikTok or something the whole time and just couldn't be bothered to see what the shotgun noises were about, or the screaming demons in the apartment
Mhm.
above?
Well, that's where I was at too. Was like, oh wait, she was only one floor down. How did she not hear? So when she gets to the parking garage and she sees the carnage, the excessive gore and such out and about, you know, she's totally shocked in that. And I forgot if something did the evil. That's right. We get POV evil shot,
Yeah, right.
and,
Yeah, right up to her
it
face.
right up to her face after she looks at all the carnage that's on the pavement, and that from the grinder, from the events just 5 minutes beforehand. But yeah, that was my question. Is okay. I'm like, she didn't hear any of that. No stomping around. No guns. No anything. The screaming down the hall. Nothing. Because she was right near the elevator too. It's not like she was like on the opposite side of building or anything. She comes out the door and she's like right near the elevator. You, you know, and she acts as if there wasn't even an earthquake. She acts like there wasn't even the earthquake. And and it's like, and that's what was frustrating for me while watching this, was that there are bits, like I said, Ellie character, how she played it, how those things played out, and some of the other things they did were really great. And then they just ruin it by either getting lazy or just doing this to kind of shock people, because it's Evil Dead. There's not many residents in the apartment, but suppose it only held itself to the floor. I'm like, you're losing potential here to possess lots of people in who's ever left in this building and really make it a crazy film where you got even more deadites around, or whatever. They don't call them deadites in this, but still the possessed or whatever.
Well, let's not even worry about that. Let's just talk about the floor itself, because there is this extended keyhole sequence where we're
Mhm.
looking up the keyhole and we're seeing the neighbors coming out and sort of trying to attack Ellie once she like starts murdering people. There's a guy with a shotgun. She hurls like a little 8-year-old boy against a door, and he collapses and dies. And if it was registering like, oh, that's really shocking, instead of like, oh my God. Um, But there's all this mayhem and carnage, and then later there's a bit where Beth takes Cassie, the little
Mhm.
girl niece, who's the one of the only other survivors out of this thing. They go out into the hall because they need to. The elevator doesn't work, so they need to get. They had to get into an abandoned apartment to get something to finish the quest. I don't know, but there's all these bodies laying in the hallway, and it isn't until like the last second that they finally start coming to life. I'm like, this is not an Evil Dead movie. Like the moment someone becomes, dies, they become a meat puppet in all of these
Mhm.
things. There might be like one moment of suspense, but yeah, the evil forces use everything at their disposal to kill and possess everything that's alive. I don't know what's going on here anymore.
Yeah, it was. I mean, again, I imagine the justification is because it's a different book, different rules, maybe. The one thing that you have, and now don't get me wrong, I'm not a huge fan of exposition. Okay, I'm not, but the other Evil Deads at least had someone who understood the book and went through it, and they talk about some of the rules or some of the things of the book that they have. Even in the 2013 one, they talked about the evil taking over, and that, I mean, they have that. In this, we kind of get it in the record playing backwards, but it almost feels incidental that that's of what he was saying on the record.
Well, first of all, I
And
found out today that the voice on the record was actually Bruce Campbell, who
that
was
yeah, that
doing.
sounded, yeah. Okay, I
I
can
I
see
didn't
that.
even pick up on it because I felt like there
Mhm,
was a bit of a like an accent to it and more like a
mhm,
gravitas. But okay, it's a record of priests who are essentially recording their adventures with
mhm.
the book and all this stuff. Why did they have to play the record backwards?
Because playing a record backwards, did you not grow up in the 80s? That gives you the words of the devil when you play it backwards.
I
The
know, but
metal
these
records,
right, but these are the words of priests who are trying to stop the devil. It's
right?
the complete what? Help me
But the
out,
re-
Mark.
but the record they don't go into it, but I think it's implied that it was tainted by the evil force. You see, you're talking about evil and Satan and demons, so it's going to play back backwards because those records have cursed words on it that won't play back normally. You've got to play back backwards in order to actually hear what's going on, because that's the evil protecting itself by
But then
reversing.
wouldn't if the devil's words were played backwards in order to understand them, wouldn't the human words which were talking, introducing the curse words also have to be backwards?
Maybe you're putting too much thought into this, Ian. No,
Hey,
no,
someone has to. No.
I could, I took it as the records were either, that the records were cursed, and that's why they're playing them backwards. That's the only justification I could do it, because, like I said, growing up in the 80s, we've seen that so many times with play the record backwards. It tells the words of the devil. Though Prince, he's got a couple of tracks on Purple Rain, which I actually played backwards, that so that he could get away with playing swear words on the radio. But
Ooh.
yeah,
Well,
but the record part was cool, and it gave you the story. The problem is there was such a disconnect, and it maybe it's part of the modern storytelling, part of my get off the lawn moment, but even with the audio, I just was not engaged with what was being said on the record, because yeah, it was just the voice. They're playing it and it's just the voice, and you're trying to put together, but it didn't, I guess it didn't resonate me or really click. I'm just like, okay, yeah, these priests, they read from this book, and there's horrors, and then I'm thinking about what goes into recording a record. This is where my brain went while I'm watching
you're
this, going,
overthinking it, Mark.
I'm going,
No.
I'm going, wait. So these guys are chanting demonic, bad shit's happening, and this guy manages to set up the record recording device so he could record while you got screams and shit happening out in his, you know. Um, but
Well, it's
but
also that I mean, in the Evil Dead 2, and Evil Dead 1 is the movie I've seen the least out of all of these. Um,
Well, there was tape. There was a tape. There was a reel-to-reel tape
right.
with
I
the
remember
guy.
the
Yeah.
real tape, but I remember the recording in Evil Dead 2 specifically, and the guy, Dr. Nobi at the who
Mhm.
owned the cabin, all kind of started out fine, and he's like recording stuff, and he's got a little dictaphone or
Mhm.
whatever. But then, as coming up to the big reveal that his wife was possessed, by the demons, and she was in the basement of the cabin, you can hear him getting freaked out, like, Henrietta is dead. He's no
Yeah.
longer the calm, composed guy. This priest guy is like, um, yes, and Father such and such killed Father O'Shaughnessy, and now I'm stuck here, and I think there might be something at the door. Whatever. He doesn't sound freaked out. I have no idea. Like, is he fighting off monsters? None of this sounds like he's experiencing the terror that any of the people in these movies have seen once the Evil Dead start attacking. Like, where is he? To your point.
Yeah, yeah, and that's where I was like too. And then he's like, and it seems like the only way to really take care of them is dismemberment doesn't even stop them. You have to bury them alive in that. And I'm like, okay, we know this. All right, you're introducing it with the new book. You go, okay, I got it. But at the same time, yeah, he's just kind of playing it out a bit not emotional, and you would think he would be more emotional
Did,
in
did they
in
say?
this whole thing.
Did they say they have to bury them alive?
Yeah, they tried to bury, yeah, they said they buried him alive because dismemberment didn't work, and it appears the only way to really take care of them, foreshadowing, is to completely basically mutilate the body completely.
Okay, that makes sense because of what they end up doing with the grinder thing
Right.
at the end. Because I'm like,
Right.
that they didn't bury them. They cut them into ribbons, and
No,
they didn't
that
really
that
come
be
back. Yeah.
because that's the third record, because once the
Mm.
first, because nobody paid attention to the weird shit that the kid was playing on his record at full volume.
Can we just talk about the single mom with the three kids living a crappy LA condemned apartment, and this kid's got like a master DJ set up, like with all the computers and lights and boards and stuff. I'm like, just sell your shit, kid. I, I don't know. Like, this is the richest poor family I've ever seen in a movie. They seem to have it pretty good.
Well, at Beth, Beth is a engineer. She's not the musician with the band. She's the audio engineer, which comes into play later on in the movie where she gets to MacGyver some shit together. In the movie, so that plays out, that she's not a musician, she's actually audio engineer.
Yeah,
But
I'm talking about what was it? Danny, the
right,
blonde-haired
right,
kid
yeah,
who's got, he's got all the equipment and stuff,
he's
right?
got the big bass, he's got the record player, the nice record player. He wants to be he's a DJ wannabe. um and he's the one that plays the records, which starts all the Evil Dead stuff. But it was like, do you guys not hear what? No one comes into his room when he's playing on the speakers. That he's got his headphones on, but it's also played on the speakers. The first record that ends up waking the evil, that ends up possessing his mom in the elevator. No one came in and going, "What the hell are you playing?" No one, and they're literally in the next room. And people might say, "Well, you're being too picky for a horror movie," and I'm like, no, the thing about good horror isn't just, oh, look how creepy Ellie is, oh, look at the gore, look at the bits. For most horror films, it depends. There's always exceptions, but still, for this to be a fifth film in a series, you want maybe something a little more. I don't know. I'm gonna sound hypocritical because people like, well, you like the Fast and Furious saga, they're all the same. And I'm like, not, they are, but they always bring something new to it. And here they kind of bring something new to it, but it really feels like they're distracting you. It's the Barnum and Bailey syndrome. It's the freak show syndrome. It's, look at how shocking this stuff is. Look how creepy this stuff is. Pay no attention to the lack of meat in the plot. Pay no attention to the plot holes at all. Look at how shocking and creepy these people are. You know, and it's like, I loved those moments, but it just doesn't come together very well. And again, it doesn't help with the throwbacks to different horror films. I like, you want to do something new, do something new.
Well, I thought, I think Fede Alvarez, if he'd been, I'm not a big fan of his, remake, but I will say he did his. People are saying like this, the Evil Dead Rise is like so extreme and so violent. I thought the Evil Dead remake was
Oh yeah.
leagues more disturbing than this. I mean, this movie's kind of, I guess, gross, but it's more like kind of monster horror, I guess, like that thing that is the amalgam of all the different people at the end. Uh, you know, I guess, but they shoot it. It's so darkly shot that you can't barely tell what you're looking at,
I
right?
and that might be part of it. I mean, outside of Ellie, who we do get to see plenty of in lights and that's why she's really creepy in very Evil Dead fashion. One
Hmm.
thing with the Evil Dead is all the possessed you've seen are in like bright light and the makeup and that. I mean, you see them in full creepy ass glory. And in here, we do get to see Ellie that, but we don't even really get to see too much of the other possessed people, especially like when the family members, yeah, spoiler, start to get possessed. They're even darkly lit in some ways to where you're not seeing everything that's going on. And part of the thing with the Evil Dead films prior is that you saw everything that was going on. You know, I mean,
Yeah, I mean the like Bridget, who's one of
right.
Ellie's daughters.
Mhm.
She like when she turns evil, like there's this really great moment in the kitchen where she's kind
Mhm.
of got Danny pinned up against the wall and is kind of guilt tripping about, you shouldn't have read the book, but she's got that wicked kind of smile, and it's not even
Mhm.
like her face is really messed up or anything. It's just her, she's just doing the acting herself through that kind of
Right.
sinister
Mhm.
grin. There's kind of like cool glow of orange in her eyes. That was a nice moment, but then 5 minutes later she's just like another kind of creature in this dark hallway, and then she gets absorbed into this giant blob of whatever. And I just kept thinking about, yeah, I saw all of this in Evil Dead 2, really. Now you might look at that and say, but yeah, those are cheesy 1987 puppets, and there's that really bad like stop motion bit where the neck kind of grows on the skull monster
Mhm.
and it starts like screeching like a pterodactyl or something, and Ash is facing off against it, but it's clearly like green
Mhm.
screened or whatever. But it's still effective because A, it's supposed to be goofy, and B, you're not again, there's no way you could have predicted that even in a movie about zombies that you're going to see that,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
The giant thing coming through the door of the cabin that's made up of all these other dead people that we've encountered. They kind of do that with state of the art special effects in Evil Dead Rise, and the result is, yeah, I've seen this in 25 other horror movies in the ensuing 35 years, and I'm just bored. There's nothing scary
Like,
about it. There's nothing tense. And as far as the callbacks go, we have to talk about that because they're context free. Let's just say that this does take place in the same universe
mhm.
as the other Evil Dead movies. Why does Beth feel the need to say to the monster, "Come get some," just like Ash did?
Ugh.
Why does she have to have a chainsaw just like Ash did? Why is, unless the creature has this big sense of humor and isn't into poetry, things that rhyme, like George Lucas might say, we get again, as in all of these movies, there's the scene where someone goes running in the woods and they get attacked by vines and probably sexually assaulted and then killed. In this one, it's Ellie getting trapped in an elevator and all the cords. Like I don't think there are this many cords that operate any elevator, but they all come out to have their way with her.
Well,
Um,
let's be careful that they don't have their way with her.
well, they
There
don't, but
there
they
it's
string her up, right?
implied, but
Yeah,
there it's implied because it's again, you're right, it's a throwback because we've seen this at least two other times where someone gets tied up and then usually unfortunately the person is sexually violated or sexually abused. You don't get that scene, but it's almost implied like, okay, she got tied up just like in the prior ones, and then the
yeah.
doors close and you don't see what happens, but then she shows up possessed and you're like, oh, this is what must have happened.
This is the fourth time in 5 movies that we've seen this. I don't remember if they did
Right.
anything similar in Army of Darkness because they're
No.
off doing their own trip, but you had
No.
that in the original film, they do it in Evil Dead 2,
Mhm.
they do it in the remake, and then
Remake,
they do
and
it
then do it
here.
here.
So it's just a shtick. It's Jason's hockey mask. They do the thing where the eyeball goes there were people in my theater who busted out laughing when the eyeball flew out of the person's mouth and into the head and into the other person's mouth. I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, raise your hand if you've never seen Evil Dead 2 before. They all would have shut up, I swear, because I'm
Mhm.
like, really, this is where we are at now, huh?
And that's the thing is I don't fault anyone for enjoying it. I'm glad people are really enjoying it and they're like, "Oh my god, this is shocking," and that. But because it's for a newer audience, we have to remember. But just as just film putting together, I'm like, there is potential for this to be so much more, and for it to feel almost lackluster and just slapped together like, okay, we're gonna throw references in here and we're gonna have this. There's a wonderful scene with a cheese grater. Okay. Love the cheese grater scene. I'm like, okay, that made me squirm a bit. And again, there's some other scenes in here, like Ellie coming out of the bathtub, you know,
That didn't belong in the trailer or anywhere in the promotional materials.
that was
That would have been
nowhere
so
near
great
no
to discover in the movie theater,
right.
but again, I'm like, "Oh, here comes the bathroom scene."
And that's the other maybe that's the other thing that took away some of the oomph or the impact of this film was the fact that outside of the throwback to the Thing mutant at the end that you get, which is if you're missing, that's what they're doing, you're not paying attention. It's basically a throwback to the Thing or an ode to the Thing, whatever you want to call it. Outside of that, nearly every in the cheese grater, nearly every one of the major like gimmick creepy moments were in the trailer. There wasn't a whole lot as far as creepy or scary moments that weren't in the trailer. Even the extended people, the eye hole scene. We got to see Ellie quite a bit in that in the trailer. And maybe that's what took away from me a little bit was the fact that you had so much of that in the trailer and you don't have as much of that in the film to where it's noticeable where those parts are. They show so much of Ellie in the trailer that by the time you get to the movie, you're like, oh yeah. Yeah. It's
That
like
I mean, imagine a world where, the trailer, you see the family, but then we see just, like, quick cuts of generic, like, monsters or gore or something, and you have no idea that the mom of this family is going to get
Mhm.
possessed and come it'll almost be like a sex swapped version of The Shining, where,
Mm.
like, dad just becomes crazy and starts attacking his, trusting family. They've all got there just fine. Damn it. I wanna see that movie now. Um,
Or
I
show
gotta go ahead, sorry.
I was just gonna say, or show the other people in the hallway possessed, but don't show much of Ellie. Give
Right.
give the idea that there's possessed. You could cut away to the family scenes that you have in here. You could even show what they did in the trailer, her strung up by the cables, but that's all you see of Ellie in the trailer after that. See her as mom or strung up. So you're like, oh, maybe she dies. Maybe she doesn't end up as a deadite, possessed because you show the other folk. Leave it a bit of a mystery, you know, and then they play at things that again, there's just so many dangling participles in this film. Like there's a thing where she is when she's first possessed or whatnot, it's in the bathroom scene, and they take her, they dunk her in the water, and it seems to cause her pain, but like actual pain. But that makes no it made no sense on why
Well,
that caused her pain, especially since we had a dead, a possessed person in the very beginning of the film literally dive into the water and come out. you
that
know
water ran through the pipe that had the religious stuff in the vault, and that's what it was. No, look, Mark, you mentioned that you can't be mad at people for enjoying the movie. I would love to be mad at the people watching the movie, but I understand that's horribly unfair. My problem is, and I saw this movie with David Fowley
Mhm.
and in an almost empty theater this weekend, and we were kind of talking over the end credits about like what we thought of the movie, and I said to him, and he agreed. One of my big problems with this is this and Fede Alvarez's remake. I feel like people are going to watch these movies and then be like, "Oh, cool. There's other movies from the 80s. They must be just like this."
Mhm.
And going and trying to watch Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness and being like, "Why'd they make these shitty comedies out of this really awesome like dark
Yeah.
horror movie?" And I shudder to think that that could happen. There could be people dismissing what the Evil Dead is based on what these freaks in Hollywood want the Evil Dead to be now.
Well, and I understand you want to do it. You want a new audience. You're trying to do something different. That's fine. But at the same time, either they're making it overcomplicated or they just this film doesn't have an identity.
No.
And that's just not me being old man on the lawn. Just taking this film by itself, just taking the movie by itself. Even Fede Alvarez's one had a more solid message and identity of the addiction angle, the fact you can't get rid of the addiction angle, the parallel between the Evil Dead possessing someone and being possessed by addiction. There's that in there. You get hit with it pretty hard, but it had the remake has that identity. In this one, they try to touch on Beth and motherhood and protection, but it falls back to what I said earlier in the episode. We don't get enough of that. Even in Fede Alvarez's, we get a section of time where they're talking about her addiction and dealing with it. We get some quiet, but here we literally jump from her revealing that she's pregnant to taking the fast Concorde that no longer exists, but still to wherever to visit her sister who's being evicted. And there's it's like, hey, I'm pregnant, and it like, oh, okay. We literally spend less than a few minutes on any type of that motherhood story that they're trying to bring into this. You could tell, in lieu of, oh, we haven't done any more horror stuff yet. We got to just do more horror stuff.
Right. And there is a lot of, it's not exposition, it's not backstory, it's just business. Like this movie is an hour and a half long, and I feel like the first 25 minutes, aside from the establishing cabin stuff,
Mm.
is, just filler and kind of setup. I'm like, I thought this was supposed to be like an Evil Dead movie. But as far as the baby stuff goes, yeah, it's just a cheap setup so that like Ellie can say something horrible to Beth about her child, like, you're going to be a terrible mother just like ours was, or whatever she said. I feel like Fede Alvarez and, that creative team would have taken this to a really dark place. Like people say
Mhm.
Evil Dead Rises is so dark. It's not dark. It's,
Mm-mm.
popcorn entertainment. When I think dark, I think of, and this is going to sound really weird, but Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead remake, where they
Mhm.
had the pregnant lady who was, just very pregnant. She dies, and then her boyfriend has to deliver and then kill the zombie baby that,
Mhm.
because mom and
Mhm.
baby died and everything comes back, and then he has to like shoot mom in the face or whatever happened. It's been a while since I've seen
Mhm.
it.
Yeah.
I'm thinking like, what? Imagine if Beth discovered she was pregnant, and then like it's 6 months later she shows up in LA. Hey,
Mhm.
it's been a while, sis. Look what happened. And so everyone's like all happy about it, but then the worst nightmare happens. The evil, the dead start to rise and possess people. Um, that I think would have been a real struggle, a real mama bear
Mhm.
fight. Because I'm not saying that she wasn't really pregnant because she just found out, but it doesn't feel as real except from these passing lines of dialogue like, oh,
D
that's right, she's a mom.
Well, and maybe that's at the core why this film just didn't sit as well with me, was because, and yes, I know what type of film it is, and I know my tastes, and I'm not being hypocritical, but within the context of this movie, there was absolutely no reason it had to be one day earlier. There was no reason in the timeline that, it had to be one day early. There's no reason where she immediately is discovers she's pregnant, and then we leap immediately to the building. I mean, it's one of those things where they could have even had her do a phone call to her sister to talk about the pregnancy a little bit. And the sister says, "Hey, I'm going through stuff right now. I can't really deal with this." Then have the sister come back to town anyway and show up on the doorstep unwanted. Now you've got a little bit more of a conflict here. I mean,
Mm.
add a little bit of more, but give it a beat. We don't get that beat. We get handed a flyer with what these characters are like. Right? Here's a trifold.
It's a Tokyo rock band flyer. Yes.
Here's a trifold flyer of who these characters are in their relationship. There you go. Don't worry. There's big text. It's easy to read. And oh yeah, now we're gonna throw buckets of blood on you in between of the pages that you're reading, because then you don't pay attention. Again, there's a lot of potential, a lot of interesting bits that they put together. It's just that it never, for me, came together in a really nice, solid film. It came up with, here's a gimmick, here's a gimmick, here's a gimmick. We just need to get from gimmick to gimmick, rather than giving me an actual story. And even, like I said, the record thing was cool, and the idea of the 3 books, okay, I'll give it to you, but I didn't give a rat's ass about any of these characters whatsoever, because there was no personality to this film except for Ellie, except for the possessed mom, who was an actual character. Everybody else felt so flat.
Well, flat, and also, like, looking at Cassie, the youngest of the niece, she had already witnessed her mom attacking the family as this zombie
Right.
thing. And I can't remember if she had seen, yeah, I think by then she'd seen some of the other attacks and maybe one of the other people get like horribly injured. But then when they're all off in their separate rooms, she goes up to the door and she sees mom through the peephole in that famous, like, gotta let me in now. And she does. She sees all the blood and the wreckage and the bodies and the little dead boy sitting in the doorway behind mom. And she opens up the door. Now, I can understand if you're a stupid 5-year-old kid or 7 or whatever, but later on in the film, we get the moment that's also in the trailer where she says that really Olsen twins precocious bit of like, you're going to make a really good mom, Auntie Beth. Oh yeah. Why? Cause you know how to lie to kids. You don't say that. You can't deliver that line if you're dumb enough to open up a door when your demon mother is outside. But they only did that so that they could have this struggle of like, oh my God, Cassie's at the door being choked. We got to go save her.
The only way that would work, and they could have pulled it off better, and maybe that's my problem. Okay, I keep saying that. I apologize for the repetitive, but
you got 99 problems with this movie.
I got 99 problems. Well, like I said, it was a mixed bag for me. They easily could have had it to where she switches back to not creepy looking mom, because we've had that in the other Evil Deads, to where the possessed person flips for a moment and looks completely normal until you get, at least that would kind of, for the Cassie character, maybe justify opening it, because she says she's better now. She could have lied, but mom still looks like dead-eyed evil. This girl was scared. There's no reason why she would have opened that door. There is none.
But let's talk about the bigger problem, which I'd almost forgotten. When did the Evil Dead become vampires? Why does mom need to be let into the apartment? We've seen these things bust through entire cabins. You've got a hallway full of things that are waiting to be undead. Mom's sitting there playing games with her daughter. Just fucking, she could probably turn to mist and go through the peephole if she wanted to. I don't understand this whole charade.
Yeah, I don't know either. Well, I mean, because it's alluding to, in a very, very softer way, it's alluding to trapping the demon down in the basement with the door. Okay, it's the same thing. We basically get the same thing: the trap door in the floor of the cabin, and the front door to the apartment. It's the same thing. Why didn't that demon, you know, uh,
That
just
I
fly out? Right.
okay, it doesn't. I might have an answer. I don't know if it makes sense. 'Cause I have to go
Mm.
back and watch all these movies again. I'm not going to do that for a while.
Mm.
But that was the Henrietta monster
Right.
initially,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
That was one body. We never found out what happened to Dr. Nobi, did we?
No, we never. No, we never did.
Interesting.
It was only
Um,
it was assumed that he was probably killed, is what it was kind of assumed. But
right, but we never
yeah.
see his
Hmm.
body like possessed or whatever, or did
Hmm.
he run away or something? That's interesting.
Right.
That's something that, can let's make a movie about that. But so Henrietta was the one body down in the basement
Mhm.
who was kind of lying dormant.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe it isn't until this thing gets up out of the basement and, perhaps it needs to kill more people to become more powerful, because as we see at the end of the movie, granted there's the spells from the book and all this stuff that
Mm.
conjure the big monster, but it seems like it gets stronger the more people that it kills, the
Right.
evil force,
Hmm.
right? Because it's coming more into our world. I don't know. But I had another point, I completely lost it. I'm rambling.
No, I'm trying not to ramble this whole episode too, because it's hard to put into words because
Oh, I know what it is.
Mm.
It's that, when the Evil Dead 2, the
Mhm.
woman was in, it's kind of tied to the same thing. She was in the basement.
Mhm.
Um, the horror kind of escalated throughout that movie, or
Right.
the
Yeah.
horror and the
Mhm.
comedy, the threat
Mhm.
escalated throughout that movie. So when you're watching it, you're not thinking, except maybe at the end after it's all over, well, why wasn't she strong enough to come out of the basement? Was she just
Right.
messing with the family, or
Mhm.
whatever? In this case, there's no need to be crafty or anything.
Mhm.
You might toy with Cassie and just say, you want to let me in,
Mhm.
so, by the hair of my chinny chin chin, going back to Shining. But I strongly felt that the filmmakers wanted me to believe that there was an actual barrier, like she could not get in there unless Ellie let her in.
Yeah. Yeah, I got kind of that feeling too, but thinking back on it, I think it's more of just they're playing instead of the trap door in the floor, it's the front door, but it's the same thing. You get a crack in the open and the arm comes out just like you kind of had it, in previous Evil Deads. Again, a bit of
But
a
even
throwback, but
it, and I think that's the distinction, though, also,
Mhm.
is that those were, aside from the Evil Dead remake, which kind of played with the same tropes, but when we see this in Evil Dead 2 especially, it's a horror comedy. It's meant to be kind of ridiculous, and this thing
Right.
coming up and flopping out of the basement, as you mentioned. When I'm watching a horror movie that's supposed to be grounded in real life and not at all absurd, my logical mind kicks in, like,
Mhm.
it's kind of like the difference between watching a National Geographic documentary about rabbits and then watching a Bugs Bunny cartoon.
Yeah. Yeah. Watching Ford versus Ferrari versus watching Fast and
Ford
Furious 9
I
or
was gonna say Ford Fairlane, but
or Ford Fairlane, either one. It kind of that different. You could tell they were trying to take the camp out of this film, yet do callbacks to camp. They were trying to make Evil Dead more of a serious film, but then with the peephole scene, which again we get multiple scenes, they actually add like a Scooby Doo comedy type of routine to where when the mom's in the hallway and you're seeing the carnage through the peephole, they literally do this running back and forth in
mhm.
front of the peephole, kind of a little comical, and I'm just like, what is this movie? And maybe, and that's where I was at with this is throughout this whole thing I'm going, what is this movie? I like the horror bits, but where is this going, and why? And then again, how does it meet up with what we saw in the beginning, which was a really convoluted I just
It's just a way of saying, yeah, I mean, it's not connected at all, like, even
no.
story-wise, but it's just a matter to say at the end of the film, "Hey, there's probably gonna be more of these movies if it does well enough. What I want to finish it up with this because we're
Hmm.
we're we're running into the problem where the discussion may be as long as the
Long as the
film.
movie, yeah, I know.
But I'm having a great time. But okay, got Ash here,
Yeah.
little Ash.
Mhm. I
Um,
didn't bring it out. I've got a vinyl because it's
oh, a big
fallen
one.
a couple times. It's fallen and it's broke, but we were able to super glue most of it. No, it's one of those extraordinarily heavy vinyl carvings of the movie poster of Army of Darkness.
Oh,
But it's one of those that weighs like 10, 15 pounds and it's fallen a couple times. So Ash's hand is kind of broke. He's missing a thumb a little bit, unfortunately, because it's fallen because it's so damn heavy. But it's one of those. So I got those. Plus the McFarlane toys are in a box somewhere,
oh
still
yeah.
in their package. But
Well, I think I have the 2-pack from Army of Darkness from
oh
McFarlane
yeah, yeah,
a
yeah,
long
yeah.
time ago.
Mhm.
But Bruce Campbell should have been in this movie. I mean, you could even have it where Ash, after all of his adventures, maybe set it after the I don't know how Ash versus Evil Dead 2 or Ash versus Evil Dead season 3 ended. I assume he's still alive. But
Mhm.
maybe this is like years after he's done with those adventures, he retires to this dilapidated dump that is being condemned and just have him be one of the neighbors in the apartment building. I think people forget what horror comedy really can be. It doesn't have to be, scary movie. It could be something like, I know this is a controversial point, but like Cabin in the Woods,
Yeah.
which I think
Mhm.
had that same Evil Dead spirit to it, but even more so retaining the graphic violence and the gore with the absurdity. Like I still love the bit where Chris Hemsworth drives that dirt bike across the canyon and gets immediately electrocuted like a lightning bug. um it's great stuff, and you could have found that balance here and brought Ash back not as a complete clown but almost like Bubba Hotep, like the
Yeah.
kind of the
Well,
grumpy old Elvis guy who is reluctantly drawn into fighting the powers of evil.
did you see Black Friday?
No, I don't think I did.
Okay,
That was the one, the convenient or the toy
it
store, the
was at the toy
department
store,
stores, yeah. Mhm.
department store. It literally is a spiritual, almost successor to Army of Darkness in a way because Bruce Campbell, who's in it, plays the manager of the store in an apron similar to the S Mart, and his attitude isn't quite so quippy, but he's kind of that old, he's an older guy. He's playing the older guy, but it felt like a spiritual successor to Army of Darkness in a way. Not as zany or whatever, but still, you're watching it going, this is like 3 beats away from another Evil Dead film. And you're right. A more maybe recent example is Happy Death Day.
I haven't seen that either, but I've heard good things.
Happy Death Day and even its sequel, those are horror with comedy in them done well. And Happy Death Day 2 just goes into almost like a Cabin in the Woods type thing. I did not expect the direction it took, but I loved it because I didn't expect where they took it at all for Happy Death Day 2. But Happy Death Day has that humor and kind of camp, but it also has serious horror moments. There's a great balance there. Here, it's tough. Like I said, I probably would have enjoyed it more had it not had the Evil Dead name and be tied to the Evil Dead really at all. Like I said, you could tweak it a bit, and sure, you'll get the people, oh, this is trying to be another Evil Dead. But at the same time, you can put it in a different context. It's really hard to try to take this film as its own being, which is what they're trying to do, while at the same time they throw so many things in there that call back to the movies that you actually enjoy. So in the end, and especially the finale, because she says to come get some, it, and then she doesn't finish the creature right away, and then she drops like another line that falls completely flat near the end, where it gets ground up completely because they get Ellie. And don't get me, I liked Cassie character Nell Fisher for a young actress to be in a film like this. I thought she did really well. She they used her efficiently and she did well in here. I was
Yeah.
pulling for her. But as far as, getting that final line, that falls flat. I'm like, wait, that's your finishing line. You bring back the come get some, and yet the finishing, even forgot what it was. The way
I don't either.
whatever she said as she pushed the last remnants of the creature into the grinder, I was just like, that's your finishing line? Really? You're gonna do this, and then you're not gonna go all the way. And there's a lot of that. They do something, but they don't go they don't commit, basically.
Yeah, I mean this, and I'm also just wondering, where does this go? Are they going to be more
Back at the
sequels,
cabin.
or are we going to wait another 10 years and be like, it's the Evil Dead Returns, but it's just another remake of the first one?
And that was even more, and that is like what I said, the dangling participle, one of many in this film, to use a bad metaphor, because my grammar is horrible. But the way they establish it, these people and these corpses are possessed. And even at the end, where it grabs certain parts and molds them together, it's not the entire body. There's still some folks who are possessed, who are undead on the floor, okay? On the floor of the building. They weren't completely eliminated, okay? What about those people? What happens because Beth and Cassie leave? What happens there? You've still got the undead person out in the woods that you bookend, that you opened the film with. She's out there. There's no like end to this exist. Her killing the creature at the end, no impact whatsoever, because they didn't do anything. It didn't solve anything. It didn't bring anything to an end.
Right. I mean, and I think a tighter script or a more talented filmmaker could have done something with that. Like, Cassie and Beth leave and they think that they've foiled everything, but we know, and it's put together more for us, or we're able to more draw that connection, that this thing has been unleashed and now it's out in the
Right.
world,
Mm-hmm.
instead of just like us sitting here thinking, well, weren't there bodies on the floor and now we got this chick at the cabin, what does that mean? Like, it could have been almost like a nice like stinger, almost like cliffhanger, but instead it just feels like a bunch of loose ends. I'm gonna end this show, Mark, because I think
Okay,
we've
sorry.
pretty much no, it's not you. It's just like I feel like I could talk about this film for another 6 hours, but I gotta sleep at some point.
Oh yeah. No, I get it. I guess I see the appeal. I see what's going on with it, and I don't fault anyone for enjoying it, because I enjoy Last Jedi. But
Hey,
so, but I guess for me, it's always frustrating to watch a film that's either going to be some legacy remake or requel or whatever you want to call it, and they say, hey, we're doing this in a new direction, and you see those bits of new things, but their callbacks are so frequent, and they're so afraid to take that chance that it distracts me for something new and questioning why they're doing it. You're right. They could have easily ended this with them grinding the creature. She literally busts through the gate of the parking lot, a la, Die Hard with Argyle, and they drive off thinking it's done. And then after they drive off, we get Evil Dead POV come down from the second floor through the elevator shaft out and either follow their car or go out into the world, and suddenly we see it go to a club, and suddenly boom, it possesses someone within a club. They turn around, they get Deadite look, and you're just like, end credits. You're like, boom, there's your sequel, and you've got your Deadites run rampant story, rather than the two bookends we get, which have no purpose here whatsoever.
or just going full on mist ending where Ellie or Cassie and Beth are driving away. They stop at a traffic light or something, and all of a sudden, then you see Evil Dead POV smash right through their Jeep, and then it cuts to black, and they're both dead, and they were in traffic, so there's witnesses. So who knows what this means? But yeah, it's a generic ending, like the stuff that they could have taken from the original films to make a real impact. There's like, we don't need that. Where can we put a chainsaw?
See, and that would have been a better if you want to still include it within that universe, do that. Do the Evil Dead POV, the evil POV ending, because the other films end that way. First one and the second one, where Ash got attacked by the Evil Dead POV in the first one, got tossed in a puddle. He gets, attacked by POV, and he gets thrown into a vortex. This one, they could have ended it with the POV coming at the two girls who we thought escaped. And then you cut to black. Yeah, exactly. What happened? Where? Who? But no, we cut the back to the cabin thing. And I'm just like,
Mark, could you imagine what would have happened as if at the end of this, Cassie and Beth got sucked into a portal and got dropped into medieval Europe, like as Ash was falling down with his car, like do almost like a Phantasm thing or a Phantasm 4 thing where you're combining like the old movies with the new movies and the sequel. Even if you never do a sequel, you just imagine, oh my God, Cassie and Beth now have to join Ash in the adventure of Army of Darkness.
Or possess Cassie at the end. They could have, you want to stay dark? Have the Evil Dead POV come after the car after they think they escape, and it goes into the back of the car, and then we have Cassie just give like a little evil smile maybe, and her eyes go just a little bit, not enough to tell Beth that she's possessed, but just something to tell the audience that, oh no, now it's in Cassie. And then you cut to black. Talk about a wonderful ending that you're just like, oh damn.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be a funny ending. It can be something, like a horror movie, like they're trying to go for here. But
we get a person who we haven't seen at all get possessed, and it's just like, I don't care about that person.
And she's just like like a worse version than the lady from Legally Blonde, and just like, oh no. All right, Mark, the Movie Man Krawcheck, thank you for this autopsy of Evil Dead Rise, which is almost we're 8 minutes short of the actual runtime, minus credits and trailers.
Yeah.
But this has been I had more fun talking to you about it than I did watching the movie, so that's always a plus.
I had fun as well. Thank you for having me on, and I'm sure some people are yelling and screaming, "Oh, you guys don't get it! You don't get it!" And I'm like, maybe we don't, but if you watch enough horror films and whatnot, you look at this and you can see exactly where it could have gone and where they ended up not going. And from that interview that I read, everything comes into focus of why it is exactly like it is.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing, Mark. I get it. I'm sending it back.
Nice.
But yeah, so thanks again. Next Thursday, we're going to be doing another live stream. We'll see. I don't think there's another Marvel press screening that week or that night, so maybe it'll be a bigger crowd. But yeah, we're going to be talking about Cool Hand Luke. Yes, we're going to be doing a live stream about a classic movie that I've never seen before. Yeah, don't throw any eggs at me. But yeah, I'm excited to do it. It's Star Wars Day. But we're not talking about Star Wars. We're talking about a movie with a character named Luke in it, though.
There you go.
For my son's birthday, and his name is Luke because of Star Wars. So bringing it full circle. Yeah. Well, although if you ask my wife, she'll say, rightfully so, partially that's because of Luke, the character from the Gilmore Girls. Look,
why not both? There you go.
That was the compromise. Anyhow. All right. Well, thanks everybody. If you were catching this live and popped it out, we appreciate it. If you're catching this in the future, we also appreciate it. What did you think of Evil Dead Rise? Tell us how wrong we are in the comments or how right we are. Did you watch it? Did you walk out? Are you going to see it 4 times? We'd like to know what you think, and we'll check out your comments and maybe even react to them on a future show. So please feel free to like and subscribe and check out Mark's stuff in the info down below. I'm going to include even a link to our discussion about the Evil Dead remake that we did a couple months ago, because that was a lot of fun. But yeah, until next time, whatever it is, thank you very much for watching Kicking the Seat here on YouTube. Take care. And yeah, I couldn't swallow this movie, and it did not swallow my soul. So I hope this conversation has been easy enough to digest. That was a terrible ending. So I'm just going to kill it right now.
I'm just